Daniel Cole woke up every morning before the sun did. Not because anyone told him to. Not because an alarm forced him out of bed. He woke up early because that was simply who he was. A man who believed that the day belonged to those who started it first. By 5:30, he had already made a cup of coffee, packed his son's lunch for school, and driven the 12 minutes to his garage on the edge of the Westfield district. Cole's Auto had been open for 9 years. It was a small place, one service bay, a tiny waiting area with 4 chairs and an old coffee machine, and a shelf on the back wall where Daniel kept a framed photo of his late wife, Maria. The shop was not fancy. The sign outside had a faded letter on the left side, and Daniel had never gotten around to replacing it. But the floor was always clean, the tools were always in their place, and every car that left that garage ran better than when it came in. That was Daniel's promise. Not written anywhere. Not printed on a business card. Just lived, quietly, every single day. His son Liam was 9 years old and had his mother's eyes. Every morning before school, Liam would sit at the kitchen table, eating his toast, telling his father about something he had read or something funny that happened at recess the day before. Daniel always listened. He never checked his phone. He never rushed him. Those 15 minutes at the kitchen table were the best part of his day, and he protected them like something precious. People in the neighborhood liked Daniel. His regulars brought him food sometimes, a container of rice from Mrs. Okafor next door to the garage, or a bag of apples from Mr. Peterson who had been coming to him for 7 years. They trusted him. He never added things to a bill that did not need to be there. He never pretended a problem was bigger than it was just to charge more. In a world where that kind of honesty was rare, word traveled. Slowly but steadily, his little shop stayed busy. His young apprentice, Marcus, had been working with him for 8 months. Marcus was 19, fast learning, and quietly observant. He noticed everything, the way Daniel always explained a repair to the customer like they were intelligent adults, the way Daniel double-checked his work before calling anyone to pick up their car, the way he never complained even on the long days. Marcus did not say much, but he paid attention. Working with Daniel was, without his fully realizing it, teaching him what it meant to be a professional. On a Tuesday morning in late autumn, a white Mercedes came slowly through the entrance of the garage. It was a beautiful car. Polished and silent and expensive in the way that only very expensive things can be. Behind the wheel was a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a dark blazer and large sunglasses. She got out of the car and looked around the garage the way some people look at a place they have already decided they do not like. Her name was Victoria Hargrove. She ran a financial technology company that had been making a lot of noise in the business world for the past 3 years. She was sharp, driven, and accustomed to things running exactly as she wanted them to run. She had built her company from a small team into something significant, and along the way, she had developed a habit of treating time like a currency that only she truly understood the value of. The car had a cracked radiator hose and a belt that had been making a low, unpleasant sound for 2 days. Her usual mechanic was on vacation. Someone at her office had mentioned Cole's Auto. She had not looked it up. She had simply driven there because she needed the problem solved and she needed it solved quickly. Daniel walked out from the bay, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. He introduced himself. He asked what was going on with the car. Victoria told him, quickly, without looking up from her phone. Daniel listened, then walked around to the front of the Mercedes and asked her to pop the hood. He looked at the engine for about 40 seconds. Then he straightened up and told her what he found. The radiator hose was definitely cracked and needed to be replaced. The belt should also be looked at while they were in there. Altogether, it was a solid 2-hour job. Victoria looked up from her phone. 2 hours, she said flatly. Yes, Daniel said. To do it right. She looked at the garage. She looked at Daniel, at his worn work clothes and calloused hands and the small shop behind him. Then she told him that she had an important call at 11 and needed the car before then. She told him that her cousin had a car like this and repairs never took that long. She told him, in a tone that was not quite rude but was very close to it, that she hoped he actually knew what he was doing with a car like hers. Daniel did not flinch. He looked at her calmly and said, "I'll have it done in 90 minutes. She handed him the keys without thanking him and walked to the waiting area. For the first 20 minutes, she sat in one of the 4 chairs and worked on her laptop. Then a call came in and she stepped outside. Daniel and Marcus, from inside the bay, could hear pieces of her conversation through the open door. She was talking to someone she worked with, describing her morning. She mentioned stopping at some repair shop. She called it a hole-in-the-wall place. She mentioned the mechanic in a way that suggested she was not describing a skilled professional. She laughed at something the other person said. Marcus, who was handing Daniel a wrench at that moment, looked at his mentor. Daniel had heard everything. He showed no reaction at all. He simply turned back to the engine and kept working. 2 of Daniel's regular customers were sitting in the waiting area at the time. An older man named Gerald, who had been coming to Cole's Auto for years, and a young teacher named Priya who was waiting on an oil change. Both of them had heard the phone call. Gerald shook his head slowly. Priya looked out the window. Nobody said anything. 84 minutes after Victoria had handed over her keys, Daniel walked into the waiting area and told her the car was ready. She came into the bay. He showed her the cracked hose he had removed, explained what had caused it, and walked her through what he had done. He showed her the belt as well. It had been close to the end of its life and would have caused a problem within a few weeks. He had replaced it. The invoice was exactly what he had quoted. Not $1 more. Victoria looked at the invoice, handed over her card, took her keys, and got into the car. She did not say thank you. She did not say the explanation was helpful. She rolled down her window as she was leaving and said, "Try to fix that sign," nodding at the faded letter outside, and then she drove away. Gerald watched the white Mercedes pull out onto the road. Then he looked at Daniel and said, quietly, "Don't let her get to you, Dan." Daniel smiled. A real smile, not forced. "She's already forgotten the whole thing," he said, and went back into the bay. That evening, Marcus sat in his car in his apartment parking lot and opened the local community board app on his phone. He did not name anyone. He did not describe the incident with any detail. He simply wrote, "Some people don't deserve the men who fix their things without complaint." He posted it and went inside. By morning, it had 200 likes and 43 comments, most of them from people sharing their own quiet observations about the honest workers in their lives who never got enough credit. Marcus read through them on his break the next day, and for a reason he could not quite explain, it made him feel a little better. What nobody in that garage knew, not Marcus, not Gerald, not Priya, was that the woman who had driven away in the white Mercedes was the daughter of a man whose life had been saved by Daniel Cole 11 years earlier. She did not know it either. It happened on a mountain highway, on a cold November night, when Daniel was 27 years old. He had been driving back from a job 2 towns over, a long, tiring day, a 2-lane road through the mountains, the kind of road where you sometimes drove for 30 minutes without seeing another car. He had his radio on low. He was thinking about getting home. He saw the SUV lose control on a patch of ice about 200 meters ahead of him. It happened fast, a sudden slide, a failed correction, and then the vehicle went through the guardrail and dropped 30 feet down the embankment into the dark below. Daniel stopped his truck immediately. He got out and looked over the edge. He could see the SUV on its side in the slope below, the headlights still on, steam rising from somewhere near the engine. He could smell something. He knew what that smell meant. He did not think about it. He simply started moving. He found a metal rod in the bed of his truck, a piece of pipe he kept for all sorts of uses, and he went down the embankment on foot, half sliding, half climbing. The driver's side door was crumpled. He could see a man inside, conscious but pinned, trying to move and unable to. Daniel got the pipe under the door frame and pulled. The metal groaned. He pulled again, harder, putting everything he had into it. The door came open. The man inside was in his late 50s. He had a deep cut on his forehead and could not feel his legs. He was frightened. Daniel talked to him the whole time, steady, calm, unhurried, while he worked to free him from the seatbelt and the crushed door panel. He told him his name. He told him help was coming, even as he was still calling emergency services with one hand. The fuel ignition happened about 60 seconds after Daniel got the men clear. They were already 10 meters from the vehicle when the sound came, sharp, bright, and total. The SUV was consumed within 2 minutes. The men from inside it sat on the cold hillside with Daniel's jacket around his shoulders, shaking, staring at where his car had been. Paramedics arrived 18 minutes later. Daniel gave his statement to the police. A young journalist at the scene tried to get his name for a story. Daniel gave a different name. He had no interest in being written about. He had simply done what needed to be done, and he wanted to go home. The man he had pulled from the burning vehicle was Edward Hargrove. He was 58 years old. He was also, though Daniel did not know it at the time, one of the most wealthy men in that part of the country. He had built his fortune quietly over 30 years, real estate, early investments, careful decisions. He was not famous, but the people who knew business knew his name. Edward recovered. It took months. His legs healed. His mind, however, did not move past what had happened on that mountain road. The man who had saved him had given the police a name that did not check out. The truck's partial license plate led nowhere useful. Edward hired a private investigator the following year. Then another one, 3 years later. Both came back with nothing solid. He kept a folder. A blurry photograph taken from a distance at the crash site. A partial view of a truck with a logo that was too dark to read clearly. A police report with a false name. For 11 years, that folder sat in the bottom drawer of his desk, and every so often he would open it and look at it and feel a weight that he could not put down. 3 days after Victoria's Tuesday visit to Cole's Auto, Edward held a quarterly dinner at his home, a tradition he had kept for years, gathering his family and a few close friends around a long table to eat well and talk about what was coming next in business and in life. Victoria was there. She was on her second glass of wine, relaxed, in a better mood than she had been in days. Her father asked about her week. She mentioned several meetings, a promising partnership that was in early talks, and then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned stopping at a small auto garage on Tuesday. She told the story lightly. The cramped shop. The mechanic. The way he had told her it would take 2 hours, as if that were acceptable. She made a small gesture with her hand, the kind of gesture that wraps a person and their entire world into something dismissible. One of the guests laughed. Someone else made a comment about knowing a better option next time. The moment was already passing. Edward had not laughed. He was looking at his daughter steadily. "Which garage?" he said. Victoria shrugged. "Something Cole's. Near the Westfield district." Edward was quiet for a moment. Then he set down his fork and excused himself from the table. He went to his study. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He took out the folder. He made a phone call to his assistant. He gave her the name of the garage, the district, the full name of the owner. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. His assistant spoke for about 30 seconds. Edward put the phone down on his desk and sat very still for a long time. When he came back to the dinner table, the conversation had moved on to something else. Victoria looked up when he returned. She noticed something different in his face but could not name it. He stood at the end of the table. The room went quiet without him saying anything. Something in his posture told everyone that whatever he was about to say deserved silence. "Victoria," he said, "the man you were describing tonight is the reason you still have a father." He told them everything. The mountain road. The cold November night. The man who had climbed down the embankment with a piece of pipe and pulled him out of a vehicle that was about to ignite. The man who had given a false name because he did not want attention. The 11 years of searching. The folder in the drawer. And the mechanic on Westfield Road whose name, Daniel Cole, had finally, after all this time, reached him. The table was absolutely silent. Victoria looked at her father. She looked at the guests. She looked at her hands on the table. Something moved across her face that no boardroom, no investor meeting, no sharp business decision had ever produced. It was the look of someone who had just understood something important, not about business, not about money, but about the invisible weight that some people carry quietly through their lives. She did not sleep well that night. Edward drove to Cole's Auto the next morning. Alone. No driver, no assistant, no prepared remarks. He parked on the street outside and walked into the open bay door. Daniel was under a truck. He slid out when he heard footsteps and stood up, wiping his hands. He saw an older man in a plain coat, standing near the entrance, looking at him with an expression he could not immediately read. Edward introduced himself. He said his name slowly. He asked Daniel, gently, if he remembered a mountain road on a cold November night, 11 years ago. There was a pause. Daniel looked at him. Something shifted in his eyes, a quiet recognition, slow and careful. I remember, Daniel said simply. Edward exhaled. Just slightly. Just enough. He told Daniel he had been searching for him for a decade. He thanked him, and the words were not polished or rehearsed, they were simply true, and they came out unsteady in the way that honest gratitude sometimes does. He told Daniel he wanted to do something for him. He mentioned a significant sum of money. He mentioned a business grant. He mentioned anything Daniel needed, he only had to ask. Daniel listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he was quiet for a moment. He looked around his garage, at the clean bay, at the tools in their places, at Marcus who had briefly stopped working and was now quietly pretending to work again. He looked at the shelf with the framed photo of Maria. I appreciate it, Daniel said. But I have everything I need. He said it without drama. Without pride that needed to prove itself. He said it the way a person says something that is simply true. Edward sat on a shop stool for almost an hour. They talked, not about money, not about what had happened on the mountain in any dramatic way. They talked about small things. About raising children alone. About what it felt like to work with your hands and trust the quality of your own effort. About the way some nights stayed with a person and some didn't. Daniel made 2 cups of coffee from the old machine in the waiting area and gave one to Edward without asking if he wanted it. When Edward finally stood to leave, he shook Daniel's hand and held it for a moment. His eyes were bright. He nodded once, turned, and walked back to his car. Marcus waited until he was gone, then looked over at Daniel. Daniel was already back at the truck he had been working on before the visit. He slid back underneath without a word. 3 days later, Victoria came to the garage. She came alone. She did not have her phone in her hand. She stood at the entrance and waited until Daniel noticed her. She had clearly prepared something to say, but when the moment came, the prepared words did not seem like enough, and she set them aside. I was unkind to you, she said. I had no reason to be, and I am sorry. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped forward and extended his hand. People have hard days, he said simply. He shook her hand, firm, clean, no weight behind it, and went back to work. Victoria stood there slightly longer than she intended. She was not sure what she had expected. An opening for her to explain herself further, perhaps. A chance to say more. But Daniel had already closed the chapter without humiliating her and without making her feel small, and somehow that felt more significant than anything else he could have done. She walked back to her car. She sat there for a moment before starting the engine. 3 weeks later, her company's fleet manager contacted Coles Auto about a maintenance contract, 22 vehicles, full rate, ongoing. When her COO asked where the referral had come from, Victoria said only that it was the best shop in the city. She never told the story publicly. She never made herself part of it. Daniel hired Marcus as a full-time employee the following month. On his first official day, Daniel shook his hand and told him, "The work speaks for itself." It always has. Marcus wrote that down that evening. He printed it out the next morning and put it in a small frame above his workbench. And every morning, before the sun came up, Daniel Cole opened his garage door, turned on the lights, and started the day. A small photo of Maria on the shelf. A packed lunch in the truck for Liam. Tools in their places. The quiet pride of a man who asked for nothing, expected nothing, and gave everything, not because anyone was watching, but because that was simply who he was.